Hello, everybody. My name is Dr. Keith McNally, and welcome to my story. This is my daughter, Kaylin, and this is where the story begins. When COVID-19 hit and we transitioned into virtual learning, Kaylin didn't do well. She didn't do well academically. She struggled with the virtual learning experience, and she struggled really comprehending and understanding what the teacher was expecting of her in order to perform well academically. Now, this particular situation focuses on a project that she was given, and it focused on the Industrial Revolution. The reason why this is important and why I'm sharing this with you today is because the project was framed rather poorly, and Kaylin really didn't gain any learning experience from it. So what I did once we were done with the project was transform the learning experience into a project-based learning experience, a learning model, which is a little bit different than the traditional method used in the classroom, where students are expected to learn some dates and names and some key impact information. I really wanted her to explore the content a bit further and gain the information as if you were living it at that time. So let's be a bit clear about what was expected. The project itself had students transfer some basic information, names of 4 inventors, their inventions, and their immediate impact from the book onto a Google slide deck. From there, they had to summarize the information and give a 2-minute presentation to the class. We did it. She did it. We got through the project. It was a struggle, but there was no learning. So what I did is I took the project and reframed it into a PBL learning experience. PBL meaning project-based learning. Now, I advocate for PBL, and I'm going to explain more about that in a bit. But the value here is have students inquire, investigate, and collaborate, and learn a bit more about the information. So instead of just copying and pasting names and dates and information, let's reframe the content so that we can actually put our thinking caps on, look at what's being asked, and then investigate the information. So let's consider this as PBL 101. And this is considered a driving question or a probing question to start the learning experience. So let's take a look at Eli Whitney. Eli Whitney invented the cotton gin in 1794. Think about life in 1794 and determine who would have been impacted by the cotton gin. What would have been the result of this invention? So you can see immediately how she has to think about, one, what life was like and how life was very different then than it is now. She has to take away the assumption that, clothes were bought at the store. And then she has to think about, well, how did an invention change the way people acted, change the way people worked, change the way people behaved? Okay, let's take a look at another example. Life in the early 19th century was difficult for farmers. Harvesting crops required many workers. Cyrus McCormick invented a mechanical reaper to help with the situation. What impact did the mechanical reaper have on the agricultural industry at that time? You could see now that I'm asking my daughter to think about the information in a different way. Again, she has to put herself in the position of the people in the 19th century. She has to think about the situation from that impact. She has to know, we have to investigate what inventions were going on at the time and how the mechanical reaper was different. And then how did it work? And then how did it benefit those people living at that time? Quite a different exploration. And so with these two ideas, these two probing questions, Caitlin and I went on a deep, deep quest for new information. Now you know a little bit about my daughter. Let me tell you a little bit about myself. Of course, my name is Dr. Keith McNally. I did spend some time as a United States Marine, and it was an honor to serve my country. I do have a doctorate degree in education and educational leadership, and my focus in education is in project-based learning. So whenever I'm in the classroom, I use the PBL experience to really enhance both teaching and the learning experience for my students. I value this because it gives us an opportunity to do a deeper dive into the subject matter. So it's not just about copying and pasting, learning a few dates and names or inventions or products or things like that. We really want to get into and understand what's going on, why people did what they did, why was it important at a specific time in history, and what value things have on our lives, because truly they do. So whether, regardless of industry, if you're in business or sales or education or teaching or training, anything like that, everything that we do has importance, it has value. And our learners really need to appreciate that. So going deeper beyond the textbook, beyond Google, beyond Wikipedia, we want to talk to people, we want to work together, and we want to give skills so that our students can be productive, efficient, and valuable as they grow up and go into the workplace. We need to give them those skills now. Of course, you can find me on LinkedIn at Dr. Keith McNally. And of course, if you look at my profile, I'm the question guy. Let's talk about today's agenda. So this time together is going to be focused on project-based learning. You already know that I value PBL as the methodology of choice in order to approach the learning environment. I use it, my colleagues use it, and we really find that it provides tremendous value for the overall learning experience. Aside from just learning some basic content, we put that content into context so that our learners really engage with the knowledge, really do some deep dive investigation, become problem solvers, and really appreciate the outcomes from it. They could actually do something with the information. And if not, they could have a really good conversation about the content. So let's take a look at what we're going to do. I'm going to talk to you about Bob and Alice, and Bob and Alice are going to explore. They're going to be our students who will explore the project through the PBL focus. So that's going to be our lens. We're going to talk about inquiry, PBL in action. It's all about asking questions, what questions to ask, how to ask the right questions. What kind of questions are they? Open-ended or close-ended? And then from there, we're going to move into investigation. Not just about Google or Wikipedia or the textbook. There are some valuable resources out there on the web that we can take a look at. So I'm going to give you some insights into where to bridge the investigation gap so that our students, our learners, can gain the best possible outcome from the project. And then we'll talk about collaboration. Now, there's a lot to collaboration. That's something that can't be taught in a day. It must be modeled, practiced, and reinforced over time. And there are 7 essential elements that I want to talk to you about. We'll take a look at each of them individually and how they worked together. But again, this is a big picture overview, so I'm not going to go in depth a whole lot. And then finally, I'm going to share my final thoughts with you and leave you with some incredible resources. Let's continue. So this is Bob and Alice, and Bob and Alice are typical students in your 5th grade classroom, and they are learning about the Industrial Revolution, just like my daughter. Now, how we approach the learning method is going to be really important in order to produce the results that we're looking for. And our result at this point is a deeper learning experience for our students. So what does that mean? We are going to do a lot of practice and reinforcement and modeling of the PBL structure. This involves asking questions. The first thing that we're going to teach, or I'm going to teach, is how to ask questions. Now we're going to do more of this. We're going to practice this in the next slide, but my daughter never gets the opportunity to ask questions in the classroom, unless it's something that she doesn't understand. Raise your hand. What's your question? That's been traditional, and that's been traditional for a long, long time. But what about the content material? What about the driving problem? What about the probing question? Can we ask questions around the probing question? This particular problem statement reads like this, and we've already been exposed to it. Eli Whitney invented the cotton gin in 1794. Think about life in 1794 and determine who would have been impacted by the cotton gin. What would have been the result of this invention? We could have easily have said, who invented the cell phone? What was life like before the cell phone was invented? How did people make phone calls when they were away from home? What happens when there was a car accident or you were lost or needed to contact somebody in an emergency situation? What happened before a cell phone? These are real questions that we could ask learners of today because they are very comfortable with using the cell phone and can't imagine what life was like before cell phones were invented. The same idea exists here. Bringing them back in time, doing an exploration, going on a quest, going on a discovery. For those of you who love mystery novels or mystery movies, this is the exact space that we're in. We're reconceptualizing the learning experience so that students become engrossed in it. Rather than watching somebody talk about something on a YouTube video, we're giving them the opportunity to explore this in a new way. So think for yourself, what possible questions would you ask yourselves if this was a probing question for you? Who is Eli Whitney? What was the cotton gin? When was it invented? Why was it invented? What specific reason was there to invent this product? What industry was it involved in? How did it transform that industry? How did it impact businesses? How did it impact employees? Now, we know that agriculture was labor intensive at the time. So if we take away the labor intensive component of industry, what happens to the people? How does business become more efficient? What happens to the displaced employees? How do we make more money? Is this replicatable? Can we build more than one? So our ideas around thinking become innate. We want to become very comfortable with asking questions. So let's do that. Ask yourself questions, write them down, and we'll see how we go from there. Let's find out how PBL actually works. Okay, so let's explore project-based learning in action. And let me explain what you see in front of you. So that's a mountain, that's Bob and Alice, that's the driving question, and yes, those are clouds. So this is going to be an animated adventure in how we explore project-based learning. And the first thing that we need to do is tell our students that they're going to be doing something different. they're going to be exploring learning from a different perspective. And that means they're going to have to do some work. So they're going to do work that's they may not be comfortable with. They may not be completely understanding what you're trying to accomplish. And so project-based learning in its application takes a while to work into the system. And so you're going to need, as administrators, you have to make the decision. As teachers, you got to practice, and then you have to get really, you have to get buy-in from the students. So don't expect to kind of, I say, flip the coin, and one day you're doing traditional teaching, and the next day you're going to do PBL. No, that's not how it works. And so what we need to do is kind of slowly integrate a new methodology, a new approach, a new way of thinking, a new way of approaching the classroom. You as the classroom leader, as the teacher, as the educator, really need to become comfortable flipping that coin, making that transition. And so we're going to spend some time teaching students what questions are, and that seems kind of simple, but really how to ask the right questions. What are questions? What's the difference between an open-ended question and a closed-ended questions? And so let's go ahead and explore this first idea of asking questions. So I'm going to get everything going here, and then we're going to see Bob and Alice really explore this learning time together. So initially, they were told that as a PBL project, they're going to be working together in doing all of the work. And so they're going to have to learn how to delegate responsibility, share responsibility, be accountable for one another. And we're going to talk a bit more about that when we talk about collaboration. But right now, they're thinking about, I've got something that the teacher wants me to do, but she wants me to do it in a new way. And so now is the time to really learn how to ask questions. So we need to do a couple of things. And so I'm going to talk about 3 basic ideas in order to introduce asking questions and then having your students learn how to ask questions. So this is going to involve some writing, some taking down of notes on your students' part, because the first thing that we want to do is have them brainstorm. Like I said, we're going to use this Eli Whitney probing question, driving statement as the structure for this particular activity. So you give this to your students, and we're going to model this, we're going to practice this by saying, okay, every possible question that you think needs to be answered, write it down. So you're going to give them an opportunity as a class or as individual groups, the opportunity to figure out, you know, they may have a really basic question. Well, who is Eli Whitney? That's a real question. Okay, good. That gets us started. What is the cotton gin? Looking at the context of the statement, we have some things to work with. So we have a person, we have a thing, we have a period of time, we have impacts, we have results. So this should get our students thinking about questions. What do you mean by a result of the technology? They may have never even thought to ask that question before. What do we mean by impact? Well, impact means change. Change means that something went from being something to being something else. And so what was that change? Was it good or bad? Were there challenges to that change? Things like that. What was the result of the first cotton gin? Did it work? Did it have problems? Did other people pick up the idea in other areas of the world? And so how did it transform agriculture? How did it transform business? How did it transform work? And again,
depending on, what grade level you're at or how much exposure students have in terms of asking questions, this may take a while for them to really get good at, and that's okay. The point being here is we want to flip the coin, and I'm going to use that term a lot. I use that term in my daily language with my students and how I approach life. What if things were different? I told you a little bit about I have a doctorate. I have a doctorate in education, but my first degree is in social work. So I spent some time working with teachers, uh, with students who had some behavioral issues. And again, this is back in the day. And so the terminology I used to use back then is, what if we waved a magic wand and things were different? Exactly how would they be different? What behaviors would be different? What thoughts would be different? So this is very much in the same scope of that, but in the classroom setting. Having students learn to ask questions is going to be really important in their future, and so we need to teach them now. Okay. Brainstorm questions. Have them identify the difference between open-ended and closed-ended questions. And that's really important because we know that open-ended questions require some digging and some investigation, whereas closed-ended questions are basically test questions that simply say, this is a question and it has an answer. It has a 1 or 2 word answer. And then after they list questions and can identify open versus closed-ended questions and become good at that, then have them prioritize the questions. If they're going to go on a journey, if they're going to go on an investigation, what are the things that they think they need to figure out first? And so have them prioritize, again, in terms of importance, but in terms of what do you think we need to learn first, then what do you think would be the natural progression of that learning experience? And so if they only have a few questions, you could have them do it again, or you could add, groups working together. But at the end of the experience, there should be at least, from this probing question, at least 10 to 15 starting questions. And so you could prioritize 15 starting questions. And that's the first thing to do when we start a PBL experience. We want to ask questions. We want to brainstorm those questions. We want to make sure that students understand the difference between open and closed, because some things can be answered with 1 or 2 words, while other things are going to require more investigation. And then because this leads into the investigation, we want to make sure that they have a plan of attack. And so we're going to prioritize the order in which those questions get answered. Let's go to the next. Okay, so students now have an idea of what they need to learn. So their learning experience has already begun, and they have a list of questions that need to be answered. Now, that seems like a great point to get them involved in the investigation. Go find the answers. But we're going to get there. So there's places to go to do that investigation. Now, of course, our textbooks are a great place to start, but please, a true investigation doesn't stop and end or start and end with the ebook for the course. But before we get to the investigation, there are a couple more steps to take in order to make sure that their time investigating information isn't wasted. And so that means, let's get Bob and Alice climbing that mountain. That means we need to make sure that they have a plan. It's never good to go on a quest or go on a journey without a map. We don't go anywhere without a roadmap. Of course, now we've got Google Maps, but what we want to do is make them aware that they should be following a plan. Now, this is one of those essential elements because a lot of my colleagues don't call it project-based learning, they call it planning-based learning. Because essentially it is a project, but we incorporate planning as an essential element. So they have a list of questions, but now they need to know how to navigate through those questions. So this is good for them to understand that they're going to actually create their own plan of attack. So we've prioritized the things that needed to prioritize. Now let's figure out how we're going to move from point to point to point. And that means they should be collecting a set of information or a set of data at certain points in the process. At certain points in time on the calendar, because we don't have unlimited time. So we need to make sure that every couple of days or once a week, if this is a month-long project, that they should be having collected or working through a process and working through a portion of it and being able to deliver that to you, to the teacher. And so our job is to make sure that they're on track. We need to provide a lot of guidance, facilitate a lot of support. And so they're going to need to learn accountability. We can't get away from that. So there's lots of accountability, lots of responsibility for a PBL activity. But in order for them to really learn responsibility and accountability, they need to set those benchmarks. They say, okay, well, what do you think needs to get done first? You know, what questions do you think needs to be done, needs to be answered first? And so they can say, well, we've got 15 questions. Let's try to get through the first 5 questions by the end of the week. And so, okay. And if you have a month to do this, then you could say, well, let's consider the second phase. Should you be able to answer the next 5 questions in week 2? And they say, okay, we can do that. And then, okay, well, that leaves 5 more questions. So you have the third week to really do a deep dive into the last 3 questions. And that's okay. They now have a basic plan. Now, part of the PBL experience that I'm not going to talk specifically in today's talk is reflection. And we want to give students the ability to reflect back on their own work. Analyze and think about how they approached the questions, what questions they came up with, how they approached the planning process, how did they prioritize the plan, what deliverables. We give students the opportunity to think back over the entire process at the end of the process, because that's part of the learning experience. And it's really an essential part of the learning experience, but beyond the scope of my talk today. So we go from learning to ask questions and learning to prioritize those questions to creating the plan of attack and identifying the benchmarks. When do things need to be submitted for review? Because it's important at this point that they get continual feedback from you, the facilitator, teacher, instructor. Are they going in the right direction? Are they acquiring enough information to make sense of it? And verbally speaking, those conversations that you're having with students, are they learning from this experience? What about the first week was valuable? What impacted you the most? What's your takeaway from this? What was your favorite part of this first part of the journey? Those kind of questions. But those are all feedback and facilitated questions. Right now, I'm focused on the tech, the structural component. Asking questions, prioritizing questions, creating a plan, and identifying benchmarks and deliverables. We've got one more step in the inquiry process. Students have created questions, prioritized those questions. They've created a plan and identified benchmarks. And as you can see from Bob and Alice, they're well on their way through the project. But now they're thinking to themselves, do I have the right questions in place? Do I have all of the questions in place? Am I allowed to add, change, or edit any of the questions that I have to answer? This tells us that they're thinking about their learning. They're thinking about the project. They're thinking about the process. They're thinking about the quest, the adventure, whatever you want to call it. They're thinking. Do we have the right stuff? Do we have the tools necessary to complete the task? Are we following the right path? And am I acquiring the right amount of information, or am I acquiring the right information? Project-based learning allows for pivoting. And it's good because, again, this is not just about completing the project. This is about exposing to a new learning mindset, how to think about something. The only planning methodology that doesn't allow you to pivot is waterfall, and that's if you're a project manager. Every other project management method allows in some way or another for adjustments to be made. We call that being agile, to be able to make changes necessary to complete the project within scope, within budget, within time, right? All of those things are essential. Giving students the opportunity to reflect on, do I have all of the questions that I need in order to achieve the results that I want? Allow them opportunity to ask that question. And based on the time that they have left in either the week or the project or wherever they are, you can make that decision. Yes, you could kind of go back and make some adjustments, or no, let's see what happens with what you have, and we'll reflect back on this essential element in terms of pivoting at a later time. So I'll leave you with that idea. Know that it's important. Know that if they come back to you with that question, you know that they're learning. That completes the inquiry part of the PBL process. Let's talk quickly about investigation. I'll see you next. Our students know that there's more to life than the classroom, and they're very familiar with the web at this point. The first place every student goes to find an answer, or pretty much everybody in the world goes to find an answer to a question, is Google. Google is going to give you a lot, but it's only a starting point, and it really should be used as a starting point if you're not really sure how to get started. Now, that seems redundant, but hear me out. So there's more to Google, there's life beyond Google, but it's really knowing where to go to. If you're using Google or any other search engine, what am I looking for? And how am I going to find it? And how do I know that I found the right stuff? So there's more to life than Google, and there's definitely more to life than Wikipedia. So really the question is, what's left? Well, let's talk about what's left. And I'm going to introduce to you five resources that I think are immensely valuable. Well, actually four, but it's different ways to approach it. So our students are really frustrated. They know that the textbook has some information, but you want them to go beyond the book. You want them to explore the world that they live in. That's what I want for my daughter. That's what I want for my students. I want them to really appreciate and understand that there are resources out there. And the thing is, many of us don't know what to look for or what resources are available for us. So social media. Now that seems to be an obvious answer to the question, but truthfully, there are people out there who want the PR. They want to be known as somebody who's helping other people. That builds their status on social media. So we might as well tap into it. Now, whether you're on Facebook or LinkedIn or Twitter or Instagram or YouTube, there are lots of resources out there. We just have to go find it. So we're going to query it. Now, my favorite, of course, is LinkedIn, and you could always find me there. So I'm going to go to LinkedIn and I'm going to do a query for American history. That's going to be my starting point. But I'm going to say, well, if that's going to give me some information, let's tighten that query so that I got something really specific to work towards. So American history faculty or teacher or education. The way we approach our query and the way we teach students to approach this query method is really valuable. Now, what does that mean? It means that you're going to do the query first and you're going to make contact with the subject matter experts that are out there. We really want to have those conversations before we introduce these people to our students. We want to vet them. We want to make sure that they know exactly what they're talking about, that it's consistent, and that they know that, or we have an idea that they can bring value to our classroom. That's really good for us, and it's going to be good for our students, and it's going to be good for the learning experience. Okay, so what's after social media? I'm going to go back to Google and I'm going to do a real quick search for something. What could that something be? I know, subject matter experts. So if I query subject matter experts in any field, industry, or a specific topic or idea, I'm going to get subject matter experts to talk to. It's a different way of approaching the query. But what I'm suggesting is that we want to get face to face. We want to bring people into this conversation, people who are experts, people who have been there. Now, we might not find anybody who's been in the Industrial Revolution, but industry professionals are where it's at. They've got a lot of value to add to the conversation. They want to add value to that conversation. They want to talk about what they know. People love talking about what they know. They love talking about themselves. They love sharing that information. They love sharing that value. So go find them. Go find people to talk to. Go find them and ask them, could you talk to my students? Would you be available? I've done that in my classrooms. Now, of course, I teach adults, but when I have the opportunity, I offer my value to the classroom as well. So after we go to social media and then we go to Google for subject matter experts, where else can we go? Well, podcasts are a good source of information. Now, of course, you want to vet them and you want to listen to them first, but we as adults listen to podcasts more than that's where a lot of us get our news. We actually listen to podcasts on our way to work, on our way home from work, while we're at work. It's become part of our culture. So use it and introduce these ideas to our students. And then finally, beyond YouTube, there's another tube out there. It's called SchoolTube. SchoolTube is a filtered platform, very much like YouTube, but it's K-12 friendly. And that's really good. I've started looking into it. I want to put content out on it, but at this point, I don't have any content, but I do like the content that's there. So this is all for your K-12 students. This is teachers and subject matter experts talking directly to your direct audience, your students. So these are 5 good resources to have available to you. But what I'm suggesting is that bring in the conversation, bring in those experts, and bring in those resources. And this will really add value to you, your students, and the whole learning experience. All right, we've got one more thing to cover, and that's collaboration. Stay with me. Let's talk collaboration. And so in front of you, you see a big empty space. So let's fill that space with some keywords. Let's talk about cooperation, responsibility, autonomy, coordination, respect, communication, and assertiveness. So what do these words mean to working in teams? And how do we build these skills so that our students work well in teams? This is going to be difficult, and not something that we think can happen overnight. So this is something that we have to build the concepts on over a period of time, probably well before any project learning activity that requires collaboration will be initiated. So this is something that you start early on uh, in the year, and then as young as possible, as you know is appropriate for your students in your school. So cooperation, responsibility, autonomy, coordination, respect, communication, and assertiveness. Some students don't even know what these words mean. Some students know what some of the words mean, but not all of them. Those who are playing sports and are on a sports team may have some idea of what it means to be part of a team. But this is a little bit different. You know, this is not just about doing something specific and knowing your role well. Because if you're on a baseball team and you play the outfield, you know that your job is to catch the ball that comes towards you, and that seems rather straightforward. So you have to be observant of what's going on with the pitcher, you have to be observant of what's going on with the batter, and you have to be really observant as to whether or not the ball is coming towards you, and you have to throw really hard to either the first, second, or third baseman. Straightforward. Cooperating in an academic activity or a project activity requires a bit more insight into what each other team members' roles and responsibilities are. One, you may be able to facilitate help. Two, you don't want to do their job when you've got your own job to do. And then three, you want to be able to share ideas so that everybody benefits. So that's all part of cooperation. Responsibility, of course, is assuming the role that's been given to you. If the role has been delegated either by the instructor or a team leader, you have the responsibility of completing your assigned task. Autonomy. Once you've been given the assigned task, you should do it. You have to be able to complete something that's been given to you. So you have to work individually as well as part of the team. Coordination. What do we mean by coordination? So that sometimes team members have parallel roles. They're going to do something all at the same time. Sometimes they need to input an idea so that everything kind of works and the problem gets solved, or they have to work as in a relay. So one person does one job and hands off the task to the next person and so forth. And so students really have to know how to coordinate those efforts. Respect. All ideas are good ideas. Now, not all ideas are going to work, but all ideas must be brought to the team and discussed. And that leads us to communication. How do we communicate? How do we communicate that something is going to work and not hurt somebody else's feelings, or communicate that something isn't going to work and not hurt somebody's feelings? So being able to communicate using the right words at the right time with the right inflection takes a while to practice. And then assertiveness. How does assertiveness work in teams, especially in academia? We want to be able to allow each student to feel comfortable working with a group of peers, and maybe at the same age or higher grade and lower grade. And they have to be able to assume that responsibility, take on the role, and step into the role with a level of confidence. I tend to use an acronym called CAPS when working with students, and CAPS stands for confidence, aptitude, and performance equals success. And so CAP equals S. So building up a level of confidence because you've practiced doing something means that you're learning new skills through aptitude, and you're constantly practicing and engaging in the activity, performance. So if you put those three things together, you should come out with success. And so we want to give these concepts, reinforce these concepts, and teach these concepts to our students. And so if we don't, or if they go away, or one of them is missing, then we don't have anything to work with. So we want to make sure that we practice, reinforce, facilitate, and model the appropriate behaviors that we're looking for in order to make collaboration successful. I've got one more topic, and that will conclude our talk. I'll see you in the next. So these are my final thoughts. First, I want to thank Dr. Patty Permenter and everybody who was involved in allowing me to share my thoughts with you today. Hopefully this was of value to you as educators, teachers, and parents. You recognize that I like and advocate project-based learning methodologies, and I will continue to advocate project-based learning as a more substantial way of approaching the teaching and learning experience, both in and out of the classroom. And so regardless of grade, content, or discipline, PBL has its place because it gives opportunities for exploring new and wonderful things in new and wonderful ways. And so rather just absorbing content and expecting people to regurgitate it, we could actually investigate, discover, and learn in very powerful and effective manners. I leave you with this. Bob and Alice were illustrated for me as a request from a friend. Her name is Jessica Kopecki. I will leave the PowerPoint and I will transfer it into a PDF so that those who are involved can disperse this information if you would like to review it or contact Ms. Kopecki directly. I think she's an awesome illustrator and I think you could benefit from her work. Again, thank you so much. Hopefully I'll see you again sometime soon. Bye-bye.